epigenome and your environment impact your body much more than your genes do. Your water, you're basically water, and your water is responding to the environment. Your mitochondria are little antennas. And then Bruce Lipton's stuff about the unconscious and the cell membranes and their little antennas, and the unconscious and subconscious is running your life.
Yeah.
And I'm piecing all this together and I'm going, hang on, I was living very unconsciously. I had heaps of artificial, visible, unbalanced blue light in my life from all my tech screens, my LEDs. I had heaps of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, wireless, 3G, 4G in my life. I was getting chronically dehydrated. I wasn't sleeping in a completely clear EMF environment, grounded to the earth with my power switched off. I wasn't having a good wind down routine. And I wasn't really very conscious of reprogramming my unconscious to allow beliefs to be validated with reality and then change when they don't meet reality. So I had to come clean to myself and I had to say, you know what? I caused my cancer.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Coach's Corner. I am Jeffrey David Hartford, your host and the coach. That's the conduit of optimism, altruism, consciousness, and health. And today's guest is somebody that I've been patiently waiting for since I met him last year at our Return to Nature retreat that we will be seeing each other at again very soon, June 11th and 12th. That is coming up. Be sure to check the show notes at the end. I'll put a link there. But Nathan Siles, thank you so much for joining us today.
Jeffrey, thanks so much for having me. It's really good to finally be on. I've been pushing you off for a little bit, but it's so nice to be here and to connect with you and your audience. I'm excited.
Yeah, man, me too. It's such a pleasure to have you. And I completely understand you. I wouldn't even say push it off. You know, you've had so much going on, your own life, the businesses that you've got evolving. I mean, I want to hear all about it, man. And we'll share real quick, kind of a background, if you will. You're a foundational health expert, a mitochondrial biophysics specialist, and the author of the book Biotra, which we've definitely got to promote that, get that out there a bit more. Man, I mean, the blessing you had, as I said to you before hitting record, which I'm sure as you went through every step along the way, it didn't feel like a blessing, but in hindsight, it's a blessing for you and all of us. A 2-time cancer thriver, not survivor. I don't like that terminology. You thrive, you're still thriving, and that became the catalyst for you to really thoroughly understand how the body is supposed to function optimally, how it's supposed to be connected with nature to function optimally. And man, I'm telling you what, I don't think I've heard another person out there that I would put on your level of you understand it so well, not just that you've learned it semantically, but talk about bridging the gap of semantics and experiential knowledge. You bring something to the table that I'm looking forward to tapping into.
I appreciate that, Jeffrey. Yeah, internalizing the knowledge, integrating it, and then actualizing it in yourself and others was how I proved out the nature model for myself. And now that I am a full believer in your power as nature and the nature around you, I just have to share this with the world.
Amen. Yeah, and I'm so grateful to be a part of it and cross our paths. And I'm going to absorb as much as I can, and I know the audience will as well. So, I mean, that being said, you know, give us your background. Let the audience hear it. I mean, I've mentioned your name before. I've had posts and such, but you know, for anyone that might not be familiar, let's dig into some of the background and what made you the man you are today.
Absolutely. So I am legally blind, and I started with a diagnosis when I was 8 months old. So I obviously clearly don't remember that sort of a story that my oncologists and ophthalmologists and parents told me. When I was diagnosed with retinoblastoma, which is bilateral retinal cancer, about 20 tumors on each retina. It was a bit of a shock because, you know, my parents, I was a happy baby, 6 months old, eyes were looking straight, perfectly healthy, seemingly no problems. And then suddenly between that 6-month and 8-month period of age, I started developing these tumors, and they grew very rapidly, very proliferatively through the whole retina, and were leading towards the optic nerve and deeper structures in the brain. Naturally, what happened with my eye muscles is they moved to the side so they could see out of functional retina that was still visible. So I sort of had a slight alteration to an experience in the world, but it was really difficult for anyone to understand that happening until I got my brain scans. And then there we go, like there was the cancer. So they rushed me to the front of the queue. I went through 3 days of straight radiation therapy, so X-ray radiation through the temples. to kill the cancer. So there were multiple things that happened during that time of, oh, should we take the eye out? Should we do systemic chemo? Like, he stopped breathing because of the anesthetic, da da da. And eventually I was able to hang on to about 10% of my functional vision. And because the radiation came from behind, my cataracts on the back of my lens, they're actually part of the lens, but they're on the back section of the lens. So posterior cataracts are much more difficult to deal with than anterior. Most people today who have cataracts are anterior cataracts, which is the front of the lens.
Yeah.
And that's cloudy and blurry because the artificial light or the excess radiation has come from the front. Mine came from the back. So naturally, my ophthalmologist was saying, look, it's a degenerative condition. The retina is being damaged so early in life. You're going to have challenges, growth and metabolism issues later in life, and lots of other challenges. So wear sunglasses all the time to protect yourself from UV light. Make sure that you're getting enough sleep, and make sure you're eating a good diet. The conventional wisdom that we sort of got taught. And at the same time, I was being prepared to go blind. So they were teaching me how to touch type on keyboards without looking at the keyboard. They were teaching me how to read and type Braille, those dots. They were teaching me how to listen to things at 4 to 5 times speed and intellectualize that as I was learning how to write and read and all those things. So I became quite technologically surrounded and dominated by. So I had my first laptop computer, notebook computer at age 4, so I could sort of partake and access information similar to what others did, not to mention the large print papers and all these things. So naturally, you would imagine I grew up quite different. But luckily for me, the radiation didn't damage deeper parts of the brain, such as the hypothalamus or the pituitary. And so those sort of structures in the brain were still very functional to be able to produce the hormones and peptides and exosomes and all the great things that they do produce, as well as regulate my central nervous system really well. The problem was the visual pathway was blocked in about 90% of the case. So you can just imagine it's like 90% scar tissue, like 3rd-degree burns on your skin. So you look at a burn patient and you go, well, how much vitamin D are they able to produce? Not very much, right? So the body's always under this chronic stress anytime there's an environmental toxin or those things, right? So the visual pathway is how we produce dopamine. It's how we produce the signals to produce thyroid hormone, adrenal hormones, cortisol, all these different things, right? And testosterone's a big signaler through the eye in the early morning. So naturally, a lot of those things throughout my life were stunted. So I needed to take care of myself extra well. And the problem was I was being given bad advice by the conventional wisdom of doctors. So unfortunately, what happened over a period of time after I graduated high school, was very successful with sport, with swimming, soccer, class valedictorian, got into the best college in Australia, went into banking, became an investment banker, was very successful in there for about 4 to 5 years. And then I was diagnosed with my second cancer, which was a testicular cancer, which metastasized through towards the liver. And the retroperitoneum space, which is around the belly button area, was fully enlarged with tumors. And so that's when I sort of looked at myself in the mirror and said, I need to take responsibility for my health. I need to figure out what is cancer, why me, why did I was successful, I was, had a great job, I had a girlfriend, I had great family, I didn't have wasn't taking any medications, I wasn't, at that time, I wasn't depressed or suicidal or anything. I thought my life was good. And so then I had a really good examination of my life, and I actually decided within 24 hours of the diagnosis, which we can get into because cancer is truly a disease that I think you have to have at least a decent resonance of fear in your body in order to allow that de-evolution strategy to actually take over a certain part of your body. So I was certainly in fear, and I made a decision to have the surgery and the chemotherapy within 24 hours of the diagnosis, scared by my oncologists. So my athlete and investment banking mindset was like, all right, cut it out, get rid of it, get back to work, get on with life, let's go, which I do regret. I wish I had taken more time. I don't regret the decision, but I regret the rapidity of that.
Sure.
Anyway, so I went through that and the surgery and the chemo and faced my mortality a couple times again and reconnected with the deepest parts of myself, having so much of my physical ego and physical being, my hair, eyelashes, skin, everything was just falling out. Cachexic, I lost my muscles. I went down from 175 pounds to 130 as a 6'2" guy. And I thought, okay, like then at the end of it, my oncologist shook my hand and said, "Congratulations, the 5 rounds of chemotherapy worked. You're in remission." And that was when I looked at myself in the mirror that night and I thought, I feel sicker than when I started the chemotherapy and the surgery. So how could I cure cancer in my body with poison and then feel like it's a success? So I started the long road to rebuilding. And selfishly, I took a year off work and I integrated as much knowledge as I could about cancer initially, and then total health, the difference between genetics and epigenetics. And then I found I was always into Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and natural therapies. My mom was a remedial massage therapist and she had a clinic that had herbs and acupuncture a few years before that. So she was always feeding me like green juices and disgusting smelling teas and taking me to my a naturopath just anytime I got sick instead of a regular allopathic doctor. So I had that bent and that sort of open-mindedness to that way of thinking. And all it took was a podcast from Dr. Jack Kruse, who I call my research advisor, to actually guide me into the world of biophysics and mitochondria. And down that path, I started becoming I was already a nerd and a bit of a bookworm, but I just transferred that from finance and self-development and all those other things as a young man you're trying to do. I shifted that into health. And that's when I started getting onto, Doug Wallace, who discovered that mitochondrial DNA is inherited maternally by the mother's side. So, well, mum's genetics and mum's health and mum's health is very relevant to me. And then I started looking at Nick Lane, and he's a mitochondrial biologist as well, talking about that. And then I got into the physics of biology, which I was never interested in physics. I didn't quite understand astronomy or astrology or any of these spatial vortexes and black holes. But when you start to understand it and relate it to the human body, it started making sense and it started feeling much more interesting. So I got through that with obviously Jack Kruse, but also Jim Al-Khalili and Andrew Marino and a lot of these other guys who were talking about the different types of electromagnetic fields and the impacts on the body. And then I got into Gerald Pollack through the water side, and then obviously a lot of the other researchers that he idolized, like Gilbert Ling and Mei Wen Ho, and a lot of these others. And so I started piecing together your epigenome and your environment impact your body much more than your genes do. Your water, you're basically water, and your water is responding to the environment. Your mitochondria are little antennas. And then Bruce Lipton's stuff about the unconscious and the cell membranes and their little antennas. And the unconscious and subconscious is running your life. And I'm piecing all this together and I'm going, hang on, I was living very unconsciously. I had heaps of artificial, visible, unbalanced blue light in my life from all my tech screens, my LEDs. I had heaps of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, wireless, 3G, 4G in my life. I was getting chronically dehydrated. I wasn't sleeping in a completely clear EMF environment, grounded to the earth, with my power switched off. I wasn't having a good wind down routine, and I wasn't really very conscious of reprogramming my unconscious to allow beliefs to be validated with reality and then change when they don't meet reality. So I had to come clean to myself, and I had to say, you know what? I caused my cancer. And that was a really tough pill to swallow, because as a really smart, athletic guy, I thought I was always getting accoladed by so many people, but I was forced to not only face mortality and face my disability, but face that I'd caused my cancer. So this was a big transformation for me. And just like all my other attitude for life, I go all in. And so that's what I did. I decided to make a plan to leave the 37th South parallel, South latitude in Melbourne, Australia, to move to the tropics and give it a go. And my science mind said, you need to measure all of your biologics. You need to prove to yourself that this model works. So I started measuring all my bloods. I started measuring my urine. I started measuring saliva. I did deuterium saliva tests, breath tests. I did SIBO gut tests. I did microbiome allergy tests. I did all different blood markers. I started measuring my sleep. I went to a sleep clinic, measured what was happening with my breathing, my airways, all these things. And I wanted to find out how, and I took pictures of my retinas, and I wanted to see, can I find a way to stop the degeneration? Because at that stage, my eyes every year were degenerating. And clearly my health was too. And my mitochondrial DNA mutations were also just consistently for 24 years degenerating. So that's when I proved to myself that after 6 months staying in Melbourne and living optimally. I would say as optimally as I possibly could, connected to nature, mitigating technology. I had 6 months off from work. I measured all my biologics. They improved a small amount and then they stopped. They got capped. And I realized I've capped out the genius health lifestyle choices I can in this environment. Now I need to upgrade my environment and I need to do the exact same thing and determine whether it's actually the environment that's dictating my health expression. And within 3 months of moving to the tropics, where the Great Barrier Reef is in Australia, right up the top, a place called Cairns, within 3 months, everything doubled. My melatonin at night, the adrenal stress index doubled. My cortisol halved. My HSCRP inflammatory markers halved. My sleep scores doubled. My HRV, heart rate variability, doubled. All these things, my testosterone went to the top quartile of the range from the bottom quartile with only one testy. And I thought, okay, so I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm eating the same breakfast. I'm spending the same time connected to nature, but now I'm in a better quantum yield. So a greater light, water, and magnetic flux environment. So that's when I started going through the motions of connecting with Dr. Cruz, doing consults with him, and then wanting to go over and meet him in person to see how I could learn from the fire hose himself. And that's what I did. I got invited over in 2018, so a couple of years later, into Mexico, and I met him. And that's when he sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, look, you're doing everything right, but you could have a better environment. And I'm like, what do you mean better than the tropics? He goes, yeah, somewhere where it's tropics, but it's also high magnetic flux. And that's when I thought, you know what? Australia is not very good with its magnetism. We know that because in the water content in Australia, the deuterium fractionation in the actual water is around 160 parts per million. Almost anywhere else in the world, it's 150 to 155. Now, we know that when we vortex and spin water, we separate deuterium from hydrogen in a certain ratio. So in Australia, to me, this first principle thinking made sense. Like, okay, I need to try and move to Mexico, try at the 20th parallel, float in the cenotes there where there's high magnetic flux, keep spending time in the ocean, keep working at a desk outside, and make sure I have wired technology and all those things. So I did the same thing. And once again, my markers doubled again. So to me, it was just living proof that not only does my system respond, and that even though I've had cancer and I started behind the starting line, or I was in poker analogy, I was given a 2 and a 3. What do you do with that hand? You kind of have to bluff your way through it. Well, I found that I could actually upgrade my biology. It was responsive. I could reprogram my DNA. I could reverse my mitochondrial DNA mutations, my heteroplasmy rate. I could upgrade my biological water into more of a crystalline state, therefore capturing more energy inside my living system. And I thought, okay, I'm sleeping in, for about 3 months, I was sleeping in black mold throughout my whole place in Mexico. And I didn't feel it at all. One day I turned a light on because I don't use the lights in the house. And I saw this 3/4 of the ceiling was covered in black mold. My vitamin D was at 192,
Wow.
well above the range, unsupplemented. And I thought, hang on, my immune system's just crushing any of these toxins. And it's not the mold, it's the formaldehyde and the chemicals, the VOCs in the paint that's actually off-gassing into me through the mold. The mold's nature's cleanup crew. Mold's fine. It's just when it's on artificial stuff. Mold's great in nature. You walk through a forest, you're in mold all the time. You don't get sick. So for me, it was these poisons that were in the built materials that the mold was helping quench and digest, was releasing into me. And my body wasn't even noticing it. It was like, yeah, see you later. Have a nice day. I'm going to continue running at optimal. And that's when I said, okay, I need to help people. First, I need to write a book, tell people my story. Hopefully that's inspirational. Hopefully that gives people hope that they can change their life as well. And second, can we prove this model out with autism? Can we prove this model out with ALS? Can we prove this model out with seemingly incurable diseases or cystic fibrosis or things that are really, really difficult? Because then things like autoimmune conditions, diabetes, type 2, ADHD, OCD, these types of things, they should be easy. So I started working with patients who had these very severe conditions. And I guess you would call them clients because I was a health coach, not a doctor. So I started working with these clients and their families, their parents, their carers. And I started getting them slowly weaning off medications, cleaning out their system, stopping the poisoning, seeing how much better they got in their environment. That limited them, just like it did me, moving them to a better environment and giving them 3, 6, 12, sometimes 2 years in those environments, such as Mexico, such as Costa Rica, such as Panama, such as the tropics in Australia, such as Malta or the Canary Islands if they were in Europe. I worked with clients all over the world. And when we upgraded them to these places and measured their biologics, and suddenly they weren't tethered to the centralized medical system, they were getting better and they were going back for their annual scans, their annual checkups, and their doctors were like, what are you doing? Like, what's happening? And then they would tell them and they would go, no, that's not, that can't be it. You know, you must be seeing another doctor with a different medication or something else. And I had the same thing when I went for my annual checkups back with my oncologist. I was getting tan, my hair was glowing, my eyes were shining, and all these things were happening. And eventually he said to me, all right, just whatever you're doing, just carry on. And I didn't go back for my 5-year checkup because I didn't want to be a part of the statistic to show that the chemo worked, because the chemo left me empty-handed. What restored me was the nature protocol. So when I started seeing autistic kids who were nonverbal, after 6 months spending time in nature, they started speaking for the first time. They started, a year later, they started looking at their parents in the eyes, giving them hugs. They started going, to activities that they would never have had a chance to do. And this is not about, curing diseases or whatever. When you get sick, it's a challenging emotional time for everyone. It's about knowing there's a pathway for you, knowing that there's possibility there, that you can actually transform this. And I'm here to tell you that, you can reverse anything if you put your mind, your heart, your spirit to it, and you build a team around you that can support that. And sometimes your team is one person. For me, it was my mom. At that time, I needed. Sometimes for people, it's an employed carer. A lot of these Parkinson's patients and autistic kids that I worked with, they had a full-time carer. And I tell you, they wouldn't have been able to allow nature to truly heal themselves without that carer, right? That connection, that support, that helping them with their food, helping them govern their calendar, their daily time slots of when they pace up and down the beach, or when they're supposed to go to bed, 30 minutes without any technology before bed, all these different things. It's really important that, not to know it's very difficult to do this on your own, but once you have enough energy and once you've built up enough resilience in your system, you can do it very independently. And who would have thought a legally blind, 2-time cancer person such as myself, who can't drive a car, who walks around the airport with a cane, who has challenges with navigating reality because we're in such a visual world. I just got back from Washington DC and Texas, and I was speaking at conferences, and I'm traveling over to Iceland this summer by myself, and I'm doing all these great things. I'm in Mexico, and I'm going from the beach to the house and doing my own shopping, and because I've stopped the degeneration in my vision, I've stopped that for good. I really think I have. And so I think it's possible for anyone. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying, the transformation is real. You have the possibility of doing that. Set up your environment so you can do that. Create habits, build a team, and then just believe it's possible and have everything working towards that goal of uncovering your greatest potential. And reach out to people like me, reach out to experts, reach out to coaches like Jeff. We're here to support you on the journey because you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, man, that's so powerful. In just a couple of words at the beginning, I said so blessed you were, and as a result, we all are because of your experience. And it started within the disempowerment paradigm, I call it, right? The fear-based disempowerment paradigm. And in a sense, thank the Lord, they did their part for you initially. 8 months old, you certainly didn't have the opportunity to think the way you do now. And then even as you alluded to it, it was the fear that drove you to say, okay, let's act on this right now. Let's go do the surgery. Let's get treatment. Let's get them to take care of me. And I mean, even that I would say is a blessing because it gave you the opportunity to see that, did it quote unquote work? Sure, right? In a reactive fear-based way, because your mindset was in the right place, because you were willing to do some work yourself, it can work, quote unquote. But is it the best model? No, clearly. And you've gone on to show that and experience that and feel that, and then be able to coach other people in that capacity as well with a slew of other conditions, that it just continues to show that when you put the human body that is a part of nature back into a natural setting, it's going to respond to the signals that it gets from that setting. If you leave it in this man-made setting, indoors, under all these artificial things, it's going to respond to that environment and those signals. And that response is not good. That's not where we thrive. So, man, it's amazing listening to you speak about it and the journey you went through. And, you know, boy, so many different strings I want to pull on there. I guess first, let's talk about the fear. Let's talk about, as you said, we can go a little deeper in that. The version of you that had the fear and went that route, and you said you do have some regrets. I'd push back on the regret word just because words matter to me. And I'd say if given the opportunity, you'd change your perspective, you'd change your decision. But regret, it's almost like it had to happen that way so that it would catapult you into this version you are today. And you can express to people, hey, listen, if you go down this path, it can work for you to a degree, but you still have to work for yourself for it to really thrive and optimize. And, you know, I've kind of put it this way. I fully believe when our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions, and our support system are in alignment, we can do anything we set our mind to do. And I've seen, and you're living proof of this, even though it may not have been the optimal path, going into an allopathic, standard of care model did work for you, did get you far enough to then, take the baton yourself and go all natural and really thrive. But there's a piece of the puzzle there that if that's where people are at and that's what they feel called to do, I'm in no position to tell them not to. But as my audience knows, that isn't my path, and I'd love to hear your take, like from that fear-based into where you are today. What was the transition and what would you do differently today?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Jeff. Really, your wounds create your wisdom. And for me, mine absolutely did. And the opportunity to be thrust upon parts of your body being cut out and, crazy substances being put in. I just remember my first chemo session, I came into the hospital and I was sitting there in this like super duper lazy boy, would have been a $5,000 chair. And they make a fake fireplace on the wall and they make you feel really comfortable. And then they come in with their lab coats, their masks, their gloves, all these things. And they don't even want to touch the outside of the chemo bag. And yet this is going inside your veins, bypassing all of your first lines of defense. And as I was there, watching the machine pump it into me, I was just, my mom was holding the chemo, going through her fingers. She was energizing it with whatever kind of healing energy she could possibly do to transmute that water that's in there. I was just thinking to myself, this is like so unnatural, but there's a lesson in this, and there's something really, really big in this. And I decided to embrace it. And I think that's a really powerful way to transmute anything, any suffering, any challenge that you're going through. I didn't resist. And so I imagined the tumor in the retroperitoneum space and the circulating tumor cells throughout the rest of my body and the slightly enlarged areas close to the liver. And I imagine those like filling with white light. I imagine them filling with beautiful, unconditional love as this chemo was going in me. And yeah, okay, like 3 days in, I went home and I urinated on a plant in the backyard, and the next day the plant was dead. And that to me was like, whoa, like, wow, a living system out there is being killed by something that I'm excreting. Thank you for my kidneys. Thank you for my liver. Thank you for my innate abilities to, utilize the best of this poison to help and get rid of the stuff that maybe is even more toxic. So it was even a greater appreciation and cultivation of a miracle that the body is to be able to process this poison and somehow find a way to kill the fast growing cells and not the others. And what an interesting feat in science too, to come up with this. So embracing it and then transitioning from the fear to, and really that fear, I was watching the Truth About Cancer documentaries with Ty Bollinger, and he was talking about his parents were killed by chemotherapy, not cancer. And that's a controversial thing to say, but I was going through the chemo at the time and feeling the life force being a little bit drained by it. And instead of running in fear and being in a sympathetic overdrive about it and asking the doctor if I could stop or whatever, I just chose to embrace it. And I chose to add complementary therapies to it. So as I started to lose my strength and lose my ability to eat, the nausea was unbearable. They were offering me lots of different types of medications that people would, if you go into the health spaces and you go to the naturopaths and other people and they say, oh, you take one round of endone and you'll destroy your gut microbiome for a year, or you take one bit of Ativan, which is an anti-anxiety drug, you'll reshape your whole neurological pathways in a negative way, and you'll take IV steroids and you'll lose your entire adrenal function and age your skin and blah, blah, blah. Well, I was taking that for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of them, when it got too much, I just tried my best not to take them, pretend I was taking them and then spit them out and throw them in the bin when the nurses left. Because I did want, at one stage in the 4th round, I wanted to feel everything. So
Mm-hmm.
I did go through a stage where I refused all medications for a period of time just so I could feel what was going on. But then, after when I started losing my strength, to digress, my mom would drive me down to the beach, the local beach in Melbourne. And, I wouldn't have the strength to really, float or swim. And I was a state swimmer. So I'm not going to drown, but I had no energy to tread water or anything. So she would hold me at the water's edge with my feet in the water, watching the sunrise, about 15, 20 minutes until she ran out of energy. And then she had to plonk me down on the sand because I wanted to collect the electrons from the water at the edge, as well as capture the sun. And I did this before I knew about Dr. Cruz's protocols. This was just something that just made sense. It just felt right. My Chinese medicine and naturopathic practitioners say that this is a fantastic thing to do. You're charging your body with natural energy. And then that's why I was sort of primed for Dr. Cruz's teachings. But those sort of practices helped me realize that, okay, like, there's one thing happening here. Let's embrace that. That might be a bit of poisoning. It might be whatever. But you know what? The oncologist gave me a 80% chance that it was going to work. All right, let's just bring that in. Let's actualize that. Let's also add in as much of this natural side as possible to manage the symptoms. And, I would go home between my treatments and I would sit naked in front of the fire. Now, I didn't know about infrared light and how it works in the mitochondria. I didn't know anything. I just felt the fire comforting. So there I was doing quantum biology, biophysics practices to charge my mitochondria and reactivate, the tumor suppressor genes and all those great things while I was sort of embracing the poisoning. So that was my natural trajectory towards how do I turn this fear into, firstly, to be perfectly honest, I turned it into a fear of how do I run really fast away from this cancer, and 3 strikes you're out. So my fear propelled me into being an insatiable biohacker, searching for those really powerful solutions and really like bookworming my education into how do I extract all this genius that's put into these texts that have been around for 60, 80 years that all scientists many years before me have come up with. And how do I bring that into a practice that I can implement today that takes 5-10 minutes and gives me a significant improvement in my health?
Yeah.
And that's where cold face plunging came in. That's where I'm teaching a workshop at Return to Nature.
Yeah.
That's where, doing sauna for 10 or 15 minutes per day at a specific temperature, getting your body ready for it. That's where doing rope flow and twisting and contorting the fascia and movement came from. That's where Qigong and spiritual work and meditation came in for me. I could do 5-10 minutes of each of these particular practices and I would feel so much better. So same with sun gazing in the morning and sunbathing in the middle of the day for 15 minutes and grounding to the earth and touching a tree, playing around with an animal that's been grounded all day long and grabbing the electrons from the animal while the animal gives you joy. These types of things just became sort of very, very standard throughout my recovery. And that helped me transform the fear into a insatiable gratitude and love and passion for this. Why do other people not know about this? Why does an oncologist say, congratulations, you're in remission. Here's your 10 points. Here's your face dunking. Here's your grounding. Here's your Cellular. Here's your EMF mitigation. Here's your blue light blockers. Why is that not given to every cancer patient? They don't have to do it. They should just be given it. They should be given it as part of, hey, here's an option. And you know what? Take an Aura ring. Here's how you put it on airplane mode. Here's 3 blood markers. Maybe you can test yourself or come back and I'll review them with you. Like a vitamin D, an HSCRP, and a DHEA, master hormone. I do those 3 markers with every client I've ever worked with. And they're awesome proxies to help people understand how their recovery is going, how their system's managing inflammation, how their body's capturing light, how it's turning into reproductive chemicals, how it's doing all these great things, getting out of fight or flight, And it's a really beautiful way. So transitioning that through into something that allows you to, for me, drive my passion for educating was a true blessing.
Wow. Man. I mean, each detail you go over, it just hits me deeper. I mean, I'm getting chills over here listening to you go through it. And I really appreciate the science connection that you've got. I have an appreciation for that. When I hear people such as yourself talk about it, I receive that. But it sounds like you also had this, but you've bridged the gap. There's an intuitive sense, the idea of being at the beach, being in the water, picking up those ions before you learned what Dr. Jack Kruse was talking about. You are already doing it, and sitting by the fire and naked, all those things. Very similarly, I have certain things I feel pulled towards, and I see it through, I just have a gut feeling. It's my intuition, and I follow that. And you touched upon something that I wholeheartedly believe in as well, it's the reason, one of the reasons that I got my diagnosis is that I played an active role in creating an internal environment in my body that was conducive to a tumor being able to exist and grow and not be cleared out. So this didn't happen to me. I played an active role in allowing this to happen. And as such, that's a very empowering thought. I played a role. So if I played a role in letting this happen, I can play a role in resolving it as well. And I knew, like, when I got my diagnosis, man, it was a weird sense. I'm like, oh, I manifested this. I quite literally said out loud to a couple of different people over the years, after having watched some documentaries and really studied some of this stuff about cancer specifically, I said, all I know, I won't tell anybody what they should do, but all I know is if ever I'm diagnosed, I know what I'm going to do. And then when the diagnosis came, I had, man, it was wild, a rush of energy that started at my feet, all through my body, and culminated in this big shit-eating grin on my face. And I looked at my doctor. I said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I manifested this. And I don't want standard of care. I don't want what you have to offer. You're a wonderful person. I appreciate you, but I'll be okay. So let's pull on that string a little bit too. You mentioned it before as well. You played an active role. And I know, as you mentioned, that you kind of rattled off a couple of things, but if we can kind of compare and contrast the lifestyle that you had led that allowed some of that stuff to happen, and then how you would change that. And then let's dig into, you've definitely pulled on a lot of different things with the biophysics and the building blocks, if you will, of quantum biology, light, water, magnetism. You understand the interplay between the three of those and how nature impacts the body on such a level that if we can dig deep and give the audience some actionable items on that would be amazing.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And thank you for sharing that as well, that you resonate with that. And, good on you for being preconditioned so you can make a decision that supports your highest integrity, which I think is really beautiful. So, and I chose to do it complementary with both and throw everything at it. And it worked for me. And we've discussed, I'm grateful for that. Others I've worked with now, at least 300 clients who have stage 3 and 4 cancers. And I've seen breast and prostate and testicular and many others. Lung will be reversed without centralized medicine, which super cool to see that happen. And so, however you guys decide to do it, if anyone's diagnosed in the family, your grandparents, your parents, anyone, God forbid, a child, like it was for me, you can do it in any way you want. And I think there's a million ways to get sick and there's a million ways to get healthy. And what I think Jeff and I have found is a more smooth path to a sort of well-rounded natural path towards nourishing the terrain of the body, bringing back your natural complexity, which the quantum computer in your head, the 30 million volts per meter charge across that inner mitochondrial membrane, those things, to bring them back online, the structured water, the beautiful rich melanin on the surface of the eye and the skin and the ears and the nasal pharynx and all the other surfaces in biology, the gut. So to take it back to, just the basics of, people think maybe cancer is genetic. I think that conversation is probably very well discussed by many others, to say that there are genetic components to various cancers. My retinoblastoma, there was a genetic component, but the epigenome really controls a lot of the expression and how that eventuates. So yes, it's yes and so people can understand that there's predispositions, just like we have personality traits that have predispositions for certain jobs or certain things we're going to like, or sports or whatever. We've got that for particular disease expressions, which I like to call the weakest link. And if you have the chain and the chain's really strong, but you got one little weak link, because of what your parents did before they conceived you, or because of what happened in mom's womb when you were developing, or because of something that happened in the first 6 months or year or 2 years of your life, that's going to help accentuate that weak link. And as soon as you identify your weakest link, for me, it's cancer. For Jeff, it may also be. For others, it could be autoimmune adrenal conditions. It could be skin conditions. It could be heart conditions, atherosclerosis or plaquing, or lung conditions, respiratory issues. Whatever it is, the sooner you find it, the sooner you can learn to nourish your living system so that that area of your body doesn't get too inflamed. Because remember, inflammation, as Martin Picard says, is a signaling molecule to the rest of your body to say, I'm short of energy. Can I grab some and borrow some from you? So for me, my eyes and my testes were sending massive inflammatory signals saying, hey, I'm lacking energy. I'm lacking information signaling. I need help from healthy organs and healthy areas of the body to realign me. And so my liver and all the other areas were starting to send inflammatory cytokines and peptides and energy through the water matrix in the body, and then helping support that weak link until the body didn't have enough spare energy to be able to send, and it wasn't getting enough information timing signals from the environment with enough fidelity, that then the cancer program started taking over in the weak link, right? And sometimes if you think about chronic fatigue or, Hashimoto's or these types of conditions, they're there to slow you down so you don't have a heart attack, right? So instead of that chink in the chain breaking straight away, you may get cancer, or you may get Hashimoto's, or you may get chronic fatigue. Because if you didn't get that, you wouldn't get the tap on the shoulder or the knock on the window or the brick through the window to say, I need to change something. This chain's going to break, baby. Let's figure out how we can stop it from doing that. And you better get the message. So to take it back, so with the cancer side of things, it really starts to develop when the body's going back through its evolutionary tree. When we lose the ability to metabolize through oxidative phosphorylation, through the TCA cycle, that starts going and reverting back to glycolytic metabolism. So using this very primitive glucose anaerobic environment. And it's not just a switch, it's a slow progression. The center of the tumor tends to have the most glycolysis, Warburg metabolism function. And then as you get further out to the outside of the tumor, the outsides of the tumor can still metabolize ketones and fatty acids. It still has a somewhat intact TCA cycle through the mitochondria. It's still working. So you can't starve cancer by reducing glucose, because the tumor is still going to be fed by those fatty acids, just the center cells in the middle that aren't. And so you're really going to have very little possibility of doing anything with just diet. But that's where, understanding the condition, understanding the way it manifests, and understanding that there's also, and through Dr. Hamer's work, the German biology of new medicine, we then get into understanding the emotional and conflict and spiritual ties to how you called this particular condition. Whatever it is, doesn't have to be cancer, it could be anything. But for me, left part of the body is generally related to the feminine, according to Dr. Hamer. And the left testy is your relationship with the feminine, not only in yourself, but also out there in nature. And at the same time that I was going through this, I was in my investment banking alpha male headset, and I was really on a path I got a promotion to go to London, work in Canary Wharf. It was like the dream job to move out of Australia and go to the center of finance in the whole world is London. And I got to go there on paper until 3 weeks into preparing for that trip, and I had a flight the next week. I got my diagnosis. So it stopped me in my tracks. And it was a message that I called in through my relationship with neglecting my natural feminine side of myself. I also had relationship problems with my girlfriend at the time. And the previous girlfriend was also harassing me and causing me lots of stress too. And this was a real challenge in a personal side of it. And as soon as I started learning about this, like, whoa, unresolved conflict, left testy with the feminine, like, okay, like, yeah. I was asking for an excuse to get out of this unbalanced way of living, even though that was where, white picket fence, money, status, whatever, as a young man, you want to chase. And you can't do it unbalanced. Yeah. Just like you can't have blue light unbalanced. You need red and infrared. Like, nature is about this beautiful harmonic ratio between everything. And if you neglect one aspect of yourself too much, there's a cancer that's going to brew. And that could be a skin lesion or a skin tag or a cyst or a benign tumor or even cancer. So my message is identify your weakest link, figure out what emotional conflicts and parts of yourself you're neglecting, and then get into your subconscious, get into your unconscious, do a Bruce Lipton, do a Joe Dispenza thing, to find out, do some journaling, get into there and discover what program is being run behind there. What are you actually subconsciously, with 90% of your energy that runs on autopilot, what are you calling in? What are you asking for? What are you being pressured by your boss, your partner, your whatever, to stick to the party line, whatever that is? What's that part of you that's screaming out, I want to travel, or I want to be a painter, or I want to sing, but it's not profitable enough, or I want to, whatever. Think of something that's holding you back. I want to have kids. I want to have a family. I want to find my life partner. Whatever it is, that aspect of you needs to be nurtured. And perfect example is one of my clients I've worked with who had breast cancer. She did all the light water magnetism things. She watched the sunrise. She blocked the EMF. She used my blue light blockers. She did all the great things, and that helped her a bit. But what really helped her was recognizing that cancer is an overproduction in the breast, especially in the mammary glands. It's an overproduction of lactating milk. So when a woman, she wanted kids so badly. When a woman really wants to nurture, the body goes, oh, cool. All right, you know what? I'm going to get ready for that, even though I'm not pregnant, even though I don't have a baby. And so her mammary gland started overproducing, and then fast-growing cells turned into cancer, and she developed breast cancer. As soon as she realized that, she goes, I'm going to find outlets for my nurturing. And she went and adopted some animals. She went and looked after her niece and nephew more days a week. She did some other things, and that shrunk the tumor, dramatically. So with this sort of thing, you can have overexpression of cells, such as in my testicular cancer and the breast cancer client that I worked with. You can have an underproduction of cells where things just really just shut off, or you could have nothing, just no proliferation, no growth whatsoever. It depends on the conflict. It depends on how you perceive this conflict. And that's going to manifest in particular areas, especially your weakest link. So that's how I see calling things in from a biochemistry standpoint, but also a psychospiritual standpoint. And then the biggest things that I looked at as a semi-professional athlete, a 175-pound strong guy, I was not blocking artificial visible light from hitting my eye and skin. I was not taking care of my EMF exposure. I had my phone. I would always put my wallet in my right pocket and my phone in my left. And you could say that was the thing that pushed it to the left side of the testy, not the right testy. You could also say it's the feminine, right? You could say but when things stack up, you start to go, hey, hang on. I also had some geopathic Hartman-Curry crosses from a building biologist that came over to my house and did a test right along my pelvis on the left side of the bed, right where I used to sleep. So we've got geopathic stress. And the more you look into it, just like Jeff and I, the more you dive into this stuff, the more you see it's endless, and there's little sort of twigs that you can keep pulling out, and they line up and they help you find peace of mind in what's happened to you and why you. And I think once you get comfortable with that, as Jeffrey said, the reframe on the language is, I don't regret it. I don't regret these things. I actually love that these things are happening, because it's me in constant relationship with myself and the environment. And it's me leading myself down these breadcrumbs to find my deepest purpose. And at this stage in my life, my deepest purpose is to share this information with you and to help you identify, to be your own doctor, to be your own first point of call, and to go, here's how I can pinpoint what's going to take me out in this life, because we're all going to die. No one's getting out alive. How do I have a really kick-ass, great journey that I can build like-minded connections, the real wealth, real relationships? That's the real wealth. How do I build that? How do I create health abundance? So no matter where I go in the world, whether it's northern Finland in icy glaciers, or if it's in Colombia on the equator, how do I make sure that my system is resilient so that I can do those things, so I can fly on planes and not have crazy jet lag, so I can go and spend 3 or 4 days in a quantum biology conference in Washington, D.C. and hang out with Doug Wallace and Martin Picard like I did last week? How do I do that and yet not completely feel like trash in the next 4 or 5 days and fracture in my biology. And I think if I can help people understand those things, what they're telling themselves, be self-aware of how they're thinking, how they're being, and what they're creating. I mean, to truly realize you're a conscious creator and you're creating a reality all the time, I don't know anything more powerful.
Amen. Yeah, so beautiful. My mind went so many different directions as you were talking there. I'll see if I can recall and pull them up. But man, so much of that just speaks to my heart, speaks to my journey. You know, the left side feminine, right side masculine. I can relate, you know, mine being my left kidney. There's definitely a feminine side there, and kidney being related to fear. I would often tell myself, I don't really think of anything I'm afraid of, but the more I'm honest with myself, and I've done the Lipton work and the Dispenza work and the journaling and the meditating, and I'm still working on so much of that, but there's definitively some fear, be it a fear of success or a fear of failure, you know, the opportunities that may have presented themselves, and then the playing it safe mindset of, oh, it's not the right time. I'll do that in the future. And now just these opportunities that are presenting themselves, and I don't hesitate anymore. When something presents itself, especially if there's a little bit of an anxiousness in my belly about it, I'm like, okay, I'm a little afraid of this. I have to do it. And it's like, that's what I'm called to do. That's the passion. That's the purpose in life. You find your purpose, you fulfill that. And man, I'm so with you. Like, you were talking about, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. There's so many things. I think about it through that lens of Newtonian physics versus quantum physics, right? Newtonian taught us cause and effect. This causes that. But we see it pretty clear as day. It isn't always cause and effect. It's rarely cause and effect. It's more what increases the probability of it happening and what decreases the probability. And we stack what increases the probability of thriving, and we get rid of what, you know, increases the probability of disease and issues. And we start to notice things improve. So you can do some things that wouldn't be perceived as optimal from a quantum biology perspective, but you do it without fear. You do it with a faith in your body's self-ability to heal and to thrive and to, you know, stay emotionally stable and work through those things. Learn to express yourself, express your feelings. I mean, man, it's so many of the things you touched upon. Like, the relationship with my wife has improved dramatically. I've learned to articulate my thoughts better and convey what I'm thinking to her, and that's improved dramatically. Now, interestingly for me, my diagnosis came shortly after both mom and dad had passed away. Mom passed in January of 22, dad in March of 24, and my diagnosis came in June of 24 after the first symptoms coming in April of 24. So what that ended up doing for me is it allowed me to face it all head on and be so brutally honest with myself, and, you know, reflect on relationships and talk about how there was definitely, as much as there was unconditional love, there was also so much, I don't even know what I would want to call it because I don't want to make it sound worse than it was, but in many ways tension between mom and I, you know. And you talk about the mitochondrial haplotype coming from mom and her mom and so on. And I know there was unresolved trauma and stuff from them. And then I think about it through the lens of, some of us are meant to heal the bloodline. So this wasn't even just my diagnosis to heal from. There's something deeply rooted in the familial bloodline that I said, okay, I've always been a little bit of a, in the best sense of it, the black sheep of the family, middle child, you know? So it's like, all right, I can take that. I'd rather it be me than you. So I'll take it on, and I know I'll be able to get through it. And man, I always try my best in these conversations not to turn it into me, but as you're talking, I'm internalizing so much of it, and I just want to share that. And I think that's a part of this, right? Like, for us to really connect with the audience and the people listening, the way we impact lives is by sharing our story, our life experience, and again, bridging that gap of semantic knowledge with experiential knowledge. And yours has taken you in much more of a academic, scientific area that I'm familiar with a lot of the things you're talking about, but I would not be able to convey it the way that you do. So I'm so grateful for the education you're giving me as well as the audience. And as we both live these journeys and give our own bodies the opportunity to thrive and turn around and share that with others, I guess the difference in us is that's empowering to other people too. If you feel called to go Nathan style and go more academic and really study this stuff and know it inside and out, do it. Not to say I'm not studying it, but if you feel a little more intuitive, you feel just called to go do something and that works for you, good, do that. It doesn't have to be just this way to make it work. So boy, powerful stuff, man. So the subconscious, the Lipton type of stuff, have you done some, active meditation on that? Or what did you do from a subconscious side of it? How did you work through those things?
Do you know what, Jeff? I'm showing my age here, but my 9th birthday present from my mom was a Bruce Lipton tape on my Walkman, a cassette.
Wow.
And so this is where I say my mom is truly an angel guiding my path. And I'm super blessed to have someone who cares so deeply about their child. I pray for that for every child. And when I was listening to Bruce Lipton on the way to, year 5, year 6 class on the bus, that's when I first started to learn to close my eyes and be silent. And I didn't realize that closing your eyes during the day was like a practice. And that's where it really served me a lot. Especially some of the key really difficult moments, like during exams, during cold therapy. When I did my first cold thermogenesis ocean swim, it was, at 42 degrees, and I was in there for 40 minutes. And I was thinking back to when I was 9 years old about how to teleport myself back into that meditative sort of unconscious state to figure out what type of beliefs and things were rewiring and were in there. And same when I got into a 205 degree sauna for 25 minutes and, seeing how I could slow my heart rate and how I could endure this incredible hormetic stress on my body. And same with when I competed states for swimming before I jumped off that block, same type of thing, closing my eyes, finding a practice. And I remember even during some of the heats in swimming where I knew I was going to already qualify, I would close my eyes during the swim and get into a state where I could feel my sensory perception feel every molecule of water around my body and feel it smoothly slipping past. So for me, meditation is part of what I do when I focus, when I truly relax in a flow state and focus and flow. I absolutely meditate daily. I think everyone does to a different extent, even just going to the bathroom or having a shower where you're not looking at your phone or listening to music and you're allowing your thoughts to flow because you can't open your mouth in the shower because you get the water in there. So even that as an example, and when you're on the toilet, you're probably not doing deep breathing, because you obviously don't want to smell too much in there. So you're probably slowing your heart rate there. So I think we all meditate, and that's been a really powerful practice, I think, to find my intuition. And I want to touch on briefly what you shared before, because, learning the academics that I did, I'm very academic orientated. I've got a really high functioning brain, probably some ADHD, where we're all on a spectrum, and I keep it under wraps really well because I'm a fantastic listener. And that's something I've developed due to the lack of vision. So it's been a blessing to actually develop that listening. And if you ever get a chance to spend some time with me or come to one of any of your listeners out there, you'll see just what Jeffrey and I experience when we go to return to nature. I've generally a very calm, relaxed demeanor, and that's a natural sort of, energy preserving, meditative, qigong type living state where you're not reactive and you're able to move from a space of, that's interesting. Okay, let me see how that feels. So I don't ever want to have people, usurping their intuition by being in the academic side and doing biological testing and whatever. That's important, I think, as a metric to measure against your intuition to see if they line up, to see if you can tune them together so that you can start to get a sense of, what's my vitamin D now? Oh, I think it's at 70, or I think it's at 60. Or, and you kind of get a sense of what it feels like in your system. And then eventually we don't need diagnostics. We don't need things. You can measure your pulse. You just check your pulse on the inside of your wrist, or you look at yourself in the mirror to see how your pupil's dilating, or some really key things like that. And then I think what I did, and I think we'll get into later in the conversation, is, once I understood the academics and I understood mechanisms of how the body is doing certain things, I started going, how do I re-engineer nature to bring that more into our modern world? And that's where I think the doing has really become everything I do now. It was 9 to 10 years of researching and integrating and, assimilating all this latest technology and science and all these different things. And now my daily life is really, how do I engineer light bulbs? How do I engineer helmets? How do I engineer panels? How do I engineer indoor environments, living rooms, bedrooms, baby cots, all these types? How do I engineer these environments so that they mimic nature? They provide the body with the energy and information signals to dictate health unconsciously. And in that space, learning and growth and proper neural wiring and developing can take place so that person can think better, create better solutions, and create a better world for everyone. So that's why with Biospectral and Biotra and Solari and Japa Health and all these other areas that I'm affiliated with, all we're doing is focusing on how to simplify all this stuff. How do we simplify the education? How do we bring these pieces of all the complex biology, layer them into a really, no-brainer type sequence and practice, and then bring that into people's lives? So, adding that in with, and I think Biotra is a perfect example of this. Bio being life, tra being the root word of transformation, transcendent. It's a really powerful thing. So Biotra is, we've created a 30-minute practice that incorporates psycho-spiritual nourishment, biophysics, and biomechanics, seemingly disparate systems, into a 30-minute practice where you don't even have to think that you're doing a psycho-spiritual practice or a biophysics latest cutting edge hack to optimize your mitochondrial metabolism. You don't have to think about your water structuring networks or biomechanics, how your fascia is functioning through the tensegrity system, vortexing the water through the cerebral spinal fluid, through the aqueduct in the ventricles. You don't have to think about those. It happens when you do this. And it's a little sequence of, sun and cold and heat and exercise and CNS work and balance and spinning and rope flow and Indian clubs, and then you sauna, and then lots of different things, right? And you can do it with hot packs. You don't need a sauna. You could do it with a little tray of ice in a little tub with a $5 silicone snorkel, and that's your cold therapy, right? It's low resource, super easy to access. And how do we make this all the work that I've flown around the world to Germany, I've gone to Seattle to meet Pollock, I've gone to Czechoslovakia, I've gone to Czech Republic, I've gone to Russia, I've gone to lots of different places to meet Japan, all these different people, these researchers, to grab as much of their knowledge as possible, because these guys are all, and girls are all, incredibly intelligent, but they're behind these stone walls of academia, and they're barriered between us by the peer review, clinical trial, double-blind placebo system, that if their research doesn't get out to us preprint, how do we, the engineers, the biohackers, the foundational health experts, the mitochondrial biologists, the naturopaths, the chiropractors, how do we get that research and bring it to our clients to help people with very simple things that they can take home and DIY, where they don't have to spend thousands of dollars of their insurance money or whatever, visiting practitioners that change their oil and they go back and then the oil runs out and they come back in. You're not broken. Let's teach you how you're not broken. Let's teach you how to stay unbroken. And that's the real gift of what I've done, at least with Biotra, is the courses and the book and the retreats we run. Our next one's in Mexico in October. These things are here to bring you not away from your life, but to teach you skills to bring into your life. Yeah. And things that don't take that much effort, things that aren't plug and play and seem like they're, that they're plug and play. They don't seem like they're incumbent in your routine. It's like, let's passively heal. Let's find a way to stack things like eating breakfast with your feet on the grass outside facing east. Cool. Let's stack things that you naturally do into a system where you don't have to think about health. And if I get to a point, the last thing I'll say, if I get to a point where your listeners and people out there are literally living their life, they're not afraid of death, so they're not chasing longevity like all these longevity experts that are totally just afraid of death.
Right.
And they're actually creating and building and co-creating great things in their life and building real relationships. They're not even thinking about their mitochondrial health. They're not even thinking about their water structure or measuring their hormones once a year or getting a colonoscopy. Throw those out the window. If I can get you into a place where Jeffrey can coach you through your intuitive detection system, and I can help you with creating an environment and identifying where the poisons are, where the nourishing parts are, and then you can just get on with your life and live a beautiful, rich life, then I've succeeded.
I love it. I love it. I mean, in a nutshell, that is going the decentralized route in overcoming the centralized route. creating systems that people can just choose to follow if they don't want to really do the research and understand it. And that's great. And just implement it into your day. And, stacking things is such a vital piece of the puzzle. And, what went through my mind too is you're talking about the research. This is no knock on the researchers themselves. I'm so grateful for the information they're putting out there. But when we think about it through the centralized lens, we're thinking, okay, well, where's the funding coming from? Who's putting the money behind it? What outcome do they want to put out there? It's very rarely is it going to be just, hey, let's just see what happens. It's, hey, prove this for me and here's your money. And then all the journals, the history of the journals being started by Robert Maxwell, there's just so much fraud that goes into there that, again, that's the centralized paradigm. It's whether it was intentional or not. I don't like to get into presuming to know people's intentions, but you can just start to shine a light on things and say, okay, hey, whether it was intended to be good or intended to be malicious, it's turned into this thing, and this thing is less than ideal. So how do we change it, right? Let's find the solutions. Let's share information in conversations like this. I'm never going to be able to prove, even if I have a gut feeling, if somebody intended to do something harmful, but I intend to share information to empower everybody as I learn to empower myself. And that's exactly what you're doing. And I'm so grateful for it. Now, and you bring up a great point too. Like we hear the term biohacking, right? I've heard Alexis actually use the phrase bioharmonizing. I love that. Just a little more of a positive, spin on it. But it's, how do we tap into giving the body the signals that it needs, the building blocks that it needs, and being aware of, is this thing out here toxic? If I'm doing something that I think is helping me, but come to find out it's toxic. So, sharing that type of information, and you alluded to lighting and these different things, like we're never, as Jack says, we're never going to create a light that is going to mimic the sun. There is no alternative. Tina, right? The sun is Tina. But what we can certainly do is come up with better ways of what we've currently got. As you talked about, hardwiring in instead of everything being Wi-Fi and just constantly inundating the system with signals that are dehydrating it and damaging it. And we think we're giving ourselves something good. We're wearing a Whoop or an Aura ring or whatever it might be. And all these wearables are taking their toll too. It's another signal that's dehydrating. So if we can go now some practical stuff, and this could very well be a good transition and segue into what biospectral systems is doing too. But, what's ideal through nature? What is when the light signal is hitting the body and we're hydrating, we're giving the mitochondria the proper signals. If we can kind of flirt with some of the deeper sciences there, and then the actionable ways, and then what are some tools that we can use if we're not 24/7 connected with nature, which who is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about 5 years ago, when I started looking through the historical literature of when epigenetic disease started really ramping up, it was about 30 years ago. It was right around that late 1900s, the very early 2000s. And this happened to be a time where, if you listen to the late Arthur Furstenberg's book, read it, I listen to it, he talks about the electrification of the planet and how the Earth has gone through different layers of electrification, and disease seems to manifest correlated very highly with those particular increased electrifications, all the way from before 1889, when the electric grid was put in, through to satellite and radar and a lot of these other electromagnetic fields, as well as spraying DDT back in the early 1900s and adding glyphosate into our weed killer system, adding fluoride into water systems. Talking, cars, pollution from gasoline, VOCs in paint, lead poisoning in children from paint coming in with lead inside it and off-gassing. So many of these big significant effects of poisoning, and electrification being, I believe now, the most significant poisoning that we've introduced into our homes, our schools, our ecosystems, with Starlink and Neuralink, with Elon doing that, and with our virtual reality and wireless headsets that everyone seems to be wearing, especially children with a developing myelin sheath in their brain along their neurons, and developing water structures in their brains. These are all really significant points. And I started seeing ADHD and autism and Alzheimer's being diagnosed much earlier, and Parkinson's being diagnosed in their 50s, and a lot of these different conditions. And that's where biospectral really emerged. It's like we have a war on brain health right now. There is really a environmental pollution poisoning war on our children and our elderly and our normal folk in the middle who are trying to go to work and trying to build a family and try to stick everything together. There's a war on our brains and our minds. And I think that what we needed to look at was longevity is built in our brains and our hearts as a human species, and our longevity is declining. Hence why everyone's obsessed with this longevity stuff and how we can never die. I think that's ambitious, but not to say it's not impossible. And I think when we looked at the brain disease, it's like, how do we protect the brain from being poisoned? Well, artificial visible light being one of the most important things to consider. Nature's ratio, as you said, there's no other alternative to sunlight. Well, how's sunlight built, and how is that different from the light we put into our indoor environments and into our screens? And you have beautiful companies like the Daylight Computer, that are creating screens that more closely mimic nature. There's also a company that uses a solar collector on top of your roof, and then it uses really fine fiber optic cables to funnel light down into a computer screen, and the computer screen is lit by full spectrum sunlight. This is another really big part of creating more natural lighting for exposures that we have exposure to for a really long time. Imagine if your TVs, your monitor screens, all these things were powered just by sunlight. The actual spectrum there carried by fiber optic cables. I mean, that's what the Mueller cells in the eye do. They turn sunlight, they fiber optically shoot that down into deeper structures in the brain, to the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus, to the areas of the habenula. There's actually direct pathways to the habenula, the lateral habenula, which controls your prefrontal cortex decision-making from the outside, bypassing the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That deeper structures of your brain can actually get direct light without any transduction, light information and energy signals. So it shows the intricate connection from us to the environment, and how we have the most sensitive parts of our eyes on the outside, and this is for an absolute design reason. So, not to mention also the orexin system. The orexin system is another really powerful system in the eye that, anyone who will sell you lights or blue light blocking glasses or other things will never tell you about, because they don't really understand the biology of it. But these peptides respond to different frequencies of light, especially in the red and the purple ultraviolet range, and they govern the sleep-wake cycle in parallel with the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So these orexin neurons in the brain will actually tell you when you're designed to be hungry, when you're designed to be sleepy, when you're designed to be awake. And you can see these DORAs, these new drugs that pharmaceuticals are using instead of the traditional, terrible sleep medications that people are, Ambien and other things like that. They're starting to use these DORAs, which are orexin modulating medications, and they're what are now being prescribed. They're working on the orexin system. And yet, how many CEOs of blue light blocking companies are talking about orexin and designing their glasses, just like Biospectral does, to actually help support the orexin system in the eye? And this science, it's complex, but we try to make it simple with the strategies, which is why we put melanin infused inside the actual lens itself, because the iris and the retina use melanin to do that. So we decided to do that where a simple dip or a dye or a tint that most other blockers use are not working on that same system. They're not filtering the light and blocking the frequencies and transmitting the others that actually help stimulate either that system at certain times of the day or stop the stimulation at other times of the day. So not to go too deep into the science really, but really what we try to do is, we're trying to, indoor environments are degenerative generally. Yeah. So we're trying to shift that balance to a regenerative environment. And that's where my background in building biology, which I did a GeoVital building biology course about 10 years ago. And since then, I've been luckily enough been able to work with a lot of the best building biologists in the world and been able to shadow a lot of them around doing different audits all over the world. And this has been a really cool experience because you're able to see how an environment is toxic in an invisible way. That you're seemingly sitting there on the couch and just like watching TV or whatever, and you realize your appetite's not coming because there's that pulsing behind you and this happening there and this happening under the floor and then this happening on the roof, and the neighbors just plugged in their electric car to charge, and that's actually dramatically increasing the magnetic field at your couch position where you're sitting there, and suddenly you're in fight or flight mode and you no longer want to reproduce, you no longer want to eat, you're numb to the world because your body's trying to battle this invisible field. that's pressuring your cells. So you could be doing nothing and you could have all these environmental changes unless you have someone who kind of goes in, a diagnostician of the environment, which is what I call a building biologist, to go in and actually figure out what's happening in your space. And I truly believe, this is an industry that you have some really smart people, but not enough people understand. They think they're Ghostbusters and they're coming in and, putting little pendulums and things around to get rid of ghosts. No, that's the more geopathic, psychospiritual sort of healers, which I'm not poo-pooing at all. I think that's
Sure.
important. I'm just saying these guys are engineers. These guys are electricians. These guys are really clever people who have looked at the biophysics, they've looked at the electromagnetism, and they've gone in and said, okay, you need to change those light bulbs. You need to go and put a dirty electricity filter on that solar inverter. You need to rewire your entire house with fiber optic cables instead of using Wi-Fi. You need to have ports right next to all the places you sit down. One on the couch, one in the kitchen, one in your bedroom, one in the office, one on the toilet, whatever it is. So all you have to do is go there and just plug in your phone, use it on airplane mode, tint your screen to red or orange, put on your biospectral blue light blocking glasses, and suddenly you've turned your whole wireless 2.4 billion pulses per second, dysregulating your alpha wave in your brain, which is meant to keep you calm and centered. And that's just one effect. The other is releasing huge amounts of reactive oxygen species. Wi-Fi is a carcinogen. So it's been shown to dysregulate calcium. Calcium's really highly involved with apoptosis, the caspase enzyme in the mitochondria being released. So if you dysregulate calcium, you can totally dysregulate the ability for an unhealthy cell to take itself out. Same as when its ability to produce structured deuterium depleted water inside the matrix. So you're actually dehydrating cells at the intracellular level, not at the blood or skin or whatever level. Yeah, that could be going too. What we care about is the factory floor of the body, inside the cells where all your hormones are produced, where all those peptides are released, where all those exosomes are signaled, all the proteins are translated and built from the DNA. All of these things happen when there's a dehydration space inside that cell. They don't happen properly. They misfold. They don't get released. And then suddenly you take a peptide and you go, oh, this is BPC 157 is the best, or ipamorelin, or, oh, this helps so much. Yeah, because your cell's dehydrated and it's not producing it itself. So don't claim the medication as the greatest thing ever. Okay, that can get you out of a hole and treat you in an acute situation. But you need to start thinking about, why is my system down regulating that? Oh, it could be the fact that I'm not using fiber optic cabling, or I'm not using Cat6 or Cat5 Ethernets for my computer. And now you don't have to spend that thousands of dollars a year on peptides. Same as magnesium. Everyone's taking magnesium. Everyone gets benefits from magnesium. All that tells me is that everyone's calcium's dysregulated. We're living in this disgusting, calcium dysregulating world. Calcium's a non-specific stress signaler. So you can get other stresses, even emotional stress can dysregulate calcium. But EMF has been shown definitely to dysregulate calcium, and that depletes magnesium. When you deplete magnesium, that's used as one of the key metals for your mitochondrial transport. Same as copper. Copper is also dysregulated when EMF comes down, because EMF can change heavy metals. Iron is your most important heavy metal. So you can go through a process called ferroptosis, and then iron dysregulation can happen. Now you're in Morley Robbins' world, who talks about iron and copper, and iron's the enemy and magnesium's the antidote. And it's like, no, you're missing it. That's the biochemistry, that's downstream. Let's think about how we can actually mitigate at the source these EMFs. Stop wearing the Bluetooth headsets. Use your wires. Stop using Wi-Fi. Start using wires. You don't have to go back to prehistoric ages. You don't have to do that. And also, don't be fooled by these little hacks of carrying a little bit of tourmaline and organite and thinking that that is going to mitigate all of the EMF. That is like a teddy bear. It helps, right? It helps you think that it's better. It may change a small biological response to that signal, but you are not changing the EMF at the source. The EMF at the source is still doing what it's designed to do, which is interact with your water networks, your cell membranes, and your mitochondria, and program a certain energy and information signal to that. All that this is, these little, biogeometry cubes, Aries tech, stickers, all of these harmonizers, salt lamps, all these things, they're not really transmuting the energy. All they're doing is they're basically blinding the body to a biological response to that stressor. And so in some ways, it's actually reducing your ability to adapt to that environment. And yeah, maybe there's a harmonizing scalar field that helps you resonate at a higher vibration. Maybe there's some things like that, but I haven't seen any measurements of that. I haven't seen any studies showing that. And a perfect example of that is Aries Tech, who's now in all the sports stadiums and all these different things. There's stickers and they're things you put on the back of your phone. They spent $12 million on advertising, and they only earned $16 million last year in 2025. So the only thing that's sustaining them, just like Coca-Cola, if they stopped advertising, then the company would go bankrupt because they're not getting the results that they claim. This is another way to understand: shield at the source. Get rid of your EMF exposure from your environment. If you can't change your neighbor's Alexa or what car they drive, the electric car plugged in, or all those things, don't worry about it. You can't control that. Control your smart meter. Control your solar inverter. Put a dirty electricity filter on it from Biospectral. Control your lighting in your environment. Control the Wi-Fi. Control what you put up to your head.
Yeah.
Control all those things, and you're going to mitigate such a huge amount of toxins and toxicity causing all those biological effects that you'll start to take the brakes off your immune system. You'll start to allow your terrain to repopulate in a better way. And then you've done the best in your environment. You drop a canopy over your bed if you're in an apartment, so all those Wi-Fi signals, they leave. You wear EMF shielded clothing on a plane that is Wi-Fi enabled, as long as you don't have too many electric fields around you. But I tell you, every time I wear my EMF shielded beanie and my sweater and my sweatpants, and I sit next to someone and guaranteed they're going to have big wireless Bluetooth headphones,
Yep.
I'm going, yeah, I've already made the right decision.
Wow.
The trade-off here for conducting the electric fields with the metal in the fiber is not as good as the benefit I'm getting now from all the pulsing Wi-Fi of 150 people with Bluetooth headsets, all connected to the Wi-Fi on the entire flight, especially if it's a long-haul flight going from 14 hours from Melbourne to LA. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. So why would you not do that as an actual engineering practical solution?
Yeah.
And hey, I take a little tourmaline crystal and orgonite and shungite with me as well. But by no means do I think that mitigates actually reducing the EMF at the source or engineeringly protecting myself, with real intelligence. So there's so many other things, but I know you want to jump in and share something.
No, it's just so powerful. I mean, my wheels are spinning with that too. I love it because, like you said, it's all of those things. Ultimately, at the core, what they're doing to our body is dehydrating us at that cellular level. And now all of a sudden, all of these things that the body should be making, it can't. And as you said, whether it's pharmaceuticals or supplements or now the peptide craze, it's, I feel so much better when I take this. Yeah, but you're supposed to be able to make that on your own instead of just taking it and saying, okay, good, I feel better, things are fixed. That's not fixing it. That's a Band-Aid at best. And let's ask, why isn't it happening? And it's amazing to think that the dirty electricity, just things being plugged into our house, especially something that's not grounded, just the 2-prong versus the 3-prong. But then as you're alluding to, having that filtration too, plugging that in to be able to filter, how effective all that is. It's, we're not going to just live in a little hut, live in a tent somewhere. We're going to continue to live in our houses. So the best we can do to mitigate that damage within our house is just so incredibly powerful. I mean, now, what extent of all the things that you just alluded to, I would imagine the majority, if not all of them, does Biospectral offer all of those different things?
As many as we can. So we start with protecting the brain with the eyes, the visual pathway. So they're our yellow and red lenses.
Yep.
And the amazing thing about these is this is the type of yellow you need. Anything lighter than this doesn't work. So you got companies out there, and I'm not going to name names, but they believe you should have lighter than this because you should have some blue light from your unpolarized, unbalanced computer screen during the day. And I'm just not a buyer of that. I mean, they say they're a company that are based off artificial unbalanced blue light being a harm. And then they're saying, we're only going to block 85% of it because we think some of it keeps you awake. And it's like, hey, do you not know that their skin is still receiving the same daylight signal telling the brain it's the day? Why would you want to allow 15% of toxicity, unbalanced polarized light through the computer? To me, it just doesn't make any sense. So you need to have yellow ones for the day, and you need to have orange. We don't call them red, we call them orange, because this blocks 100% of the blue and 98% of the green to allow you to still have beautiful color perception, but it's not red enough to make you cut everything out and you can't even wear them. It's not practical, right? And this leads into what Biospectra was built on. It's going out and finding the answers to optimal health, which is found in nature. It's found in, as Jack Cruz always says, go and float in a caldera, a volcanic lake in El Salvador in the middle of summer, while you're eating oysters and, practicing meditation. Like, no one can do that. That's not helpful, right? We want to be helpful here. So the way to be helpful is to design things that are practical and actually built off science. So the science came first, the education came first, and then so much demand over my 1,200 clients that I've worked with have been like, what's the best blue blockers? What's the best EMF mitigation? What's the best non-fluoride source of water? What's the best non-glyphosate food that I can get at my local farmer's market? What's the best whatever? So we've decided to design something that meets that demand. Whereas most people's products have come from, let's design a product and then let's figure out how to market it with education and videos and whatever. We've done it the other way because products shouldn't exist if they're not done the way we do them. They're not done like, how do we bring more of nature to you? If you don't want to go out to nature and it's really difficult to do that, we'll sell you an approximation of nature at a really reasonable price with the best scientists and patents on melanin in the glasses, patents on the light bulb that we have, a full spectrum light bulb with 60% infrared.
Wow.
Broadband infrared. This is not LED technology. This is 60% infrared, just like your natural optical environment, because anytime you're in a green space, you're getting the reflection of broadband infrared off that chlorophyll.
Yeah.
So you're getting 42% from the sun. You're getting an additional 20 or 30% from the scattering of those photons in that green environment. And then that green environment shoots the infrared photons back up to the blue sky, to the ionosphere, which then reflect back down. So the blue sky is about 60% infrared as well. So blue is never unbalanced in nature, anywhere. It's always balanced with red and infrared. The computer doesn't have any infrared in it. I'm sorry, companies that say you should have some blue light from your computer. There's no infrared in there. Now, if you're selling your glasses with a red light panel, an infrared broadband panel that goes from 700 nanometers out to 6,000, just like our light bulb does, then I will say you can let through 15% of that blue light. But they sell the glasses by themselves. They don't sell the broadband panel. So we aim to have light bulbs in people's offices, and they can wear the day lenses if they want, or if they tint their computer screen to make it almost full red, so there's no blue light coming from it, and they've got the light bulbs in the house, they may not even need to wear the glasses at all during the day. And then that's one less thing that they have to think about. I forgot this, or it doesn't sit on my face right, or I got to itch my nose, or one less thing. So we're creating solutions to put ourselves out of business. That's what we're really trying to do. So we've got the glasses, we've got the light bulbs, we've got air tube headsets. So these are the headsets that channel the sound from a speaker down around your chest level through a silicon air tube into your earpiece with an inert piece of plastic that goes into your ear. We tried to make it out of wood, it's way too expensive, and we don't think the market's there. It's just not possible.
Sure.
I don't think anyone's going to pay $250 for a little pair of headsets.
Right.
So until that technology gets better and we find better ways to do it, we're going to stick with plastic. But this is the antidote to your Bluetooth headsets or even wired headsets where you're conducting an electric field. Now, most people don't know with the wired headsets, even the Apple or Samsung headsets, you've got a transducer, you've got a little mini speaker and power supply in the actual earpiece, and this is releasing an electromagnetic field. And this is what's interacting with the melanin in your cochlea and the hair cells all the way through that whole channel. And this is what's damaging that ability to hear, which is why African Americans and Black people have 80% less deafness than white people, because that melanin helps protect the ear canal and helps protect the hearing sense. So when you have electric, magnetic, or dirty electric fields, or radio frequency, God forbid, from a Bluetooth headset, that's degrading the melanin, leading you more towards tinnitus, leading you more towards deafness, right? So we've created that solution because we know that kids need these over-ear headsets and the in-ear headsets for school. Right. So how do we stop this brain disease? At the source, the mums and the kids. Let's figure out how we can do that. Let's get the fathers responsible, practicing and living as they preach to inspire their wives, their partners, and the kids. And let's get these headsets on the kids. Let's protect their brains with the blue light blocking glasses. And then we've created a red light helmet, which we're starting to do some tests on for ADHD and autism and brain conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And it's starting to show really cool benefits to mitigate a lot of symptoms. But once again, we're coupling it with nature, right? As you get your red light from your helmet in the clinically dosed amount with the right pulse settings, with the right, and we've shielded this thing like no one's business. Like the inert side of this, the EMF side of this is so minimal, it's unbelievable. There's the Neuronic helmet and the eye restore and the Vilite and all these other helmets that are out there. They have not considered EMF in their design at all whatsoever. We've totally mitigated 99% of all of it. So you're only getting benefit. When you put that red light on your brain, you've now structured the water, you've increased the blood flow, you've turned on some really cool nitric oxide and stem cell depots in your brain. Okay, now go outside, get a little bit of UV through your eyes, on your skin, on your head. Now you're able to structure the water and expand that exclusion zone even more. You're able to start really getting benefits from it. So it's how do we enhance the first hour of sunlight with a helmet and then bring you back outside and allow you to adapt even better. So we've got the helmet as well. And then we've got Faraday bags for your phones. Super easy. Just whack them in there, put your alarm on before you go to bed and just put it on your bedside table. It's an electric brick. It's inert, something that's very simple. You go out to dinner. You don't want to be having your phone anywhere near the table. It's rude and it's not ideal. Just put it in the Faraday bag, whack it on the table or under in your bag. Something super simple like that. We've got other little bedside lamps and night lights, bathroom lights, things you can put there that automatically motion light up with no blue. A really beautiful orange spectrum, actually. Most have got a yellow or red. We've got this really beautiful broadband orange spectrum. But the light bulbs, I would say, they're the next thing to come off. We've just created version 2. We're going to have the bulb version, the flat panel downlight, the hockey puck style light. And then we've got the 2x2s coming for office spaces, hospitals, clinics,
awesome,
schools, all these types of things. So we can truly transform that light environment. And the biggest thing that no one is focusing on in the circadian lighting space, it's not the changing throughout the day. They change the Kelvin. They do all that. They do it with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, which doesn't make any sense. I won't name brand names. And then you've got other brands coming out with LED only, narrow band infrared, because they're trying to fit within the energy standards. So they're actually abiding by some silly FCC, FDA energy standard instead of actually looking after your health. So I see them as part of the problem. Anyone who's selling you a straight LED bulb, it doesn't matter how enriched in short infrared it is, they're not doing you a benefit. Anyone who actually cares about your health is actually selling you broadband, 7 colors of the rainbow, 60% infrared, and they're going to sell it under turtle lighting or specialty decorative lighting or whatever we have to classify it as, because we need it in people's spaces because we don't have the chlorophyll in that environment. We don't have the scattering. We need huge amounts of that. And then once you get that in there in your office, go and put a few office plants in there. And guess what? Now you've got even more scattering infrared. Most people do the plants without putting the proper lighting in.
Sure.
It's doing nothing. So there's some of the things that we're creating.
That's amazing. I love it. And I love that you mentioned schools and hospitals too, because those are two that come to my mind all the time. And you think about that. I could be very critical of allopathic medicine, Western medicine. There's so many things we could point out that I don't love. But what I always start with is the people that are working in it have some massive hearts, want to help other people. And little do they know, they are the ones being harmed the most by being in that environment for 12 plus hour shifts over and over and over and over. And they're some of the least healthy people we know. My understanding is doctors have the highest suicide rate. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it that just break my heart for people that are trying to help and make a difference. So if we can help get them, some of the hardwired things, get the right lighting in there and change that environment so it can help them and certainly help the patients a whole lot more as well. And then same thing with the students. So, man, I love everything about it. And, hearing you talk about it, it starts from the premise of nature is what we need. Nature is what heals us. If you're not going to be able to be out in nature 24/7, as I alluded to before, then here are some things that we can provide you that are going to make your internal environment, in your house a lot safer and help you out. And not just, safer, but in many of these cases, it sounds like these are going to be as close to optimal as you can get outside of just being outside directly connected to nature. So I love that, man.
And
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Jeff, and we're going to keep improving these, right? As the
Yeah.
science changes, as we update this, we've got some of the best electrical engineers, physicists, and electricians and building biologists on the team. So we're going to keep updating these and make sure that we're putting ourselves out of business. That's what all good businesses should do. And we're here to inspire other creative minds to go and up their game, accelerate what they're doing, go and consider the science, go and consider what we're doing, put us out of business. I have no dog in this hunt. I want the best for humanity, right? And this is why we've created one more thing I'll share with you, a grounding plug, which actually goes between the grounding mat and sheet and the wall, which this is going to transform the whole grounding experience. There's been a couple people who've talked about this, Laura Conover being one of them, that's identified this issue in the grounding industry, that people who are buying grounding sheets and grounding mats, they get them, they spend 3 weeks on them, they're stressing the body out because they're plugging themselves into the house wiring, or they're putting a grounding rod in and they're in the presence of live power, and that live power is going and finding a way to earth through the grounding sheet into the rod outside. So no matter what you do to ground that rod and that sheet or that mat that you've got, you're causing issues in the body. You've got voltage and current running through the body. So we created a plug that stops that, mitigates that whole field, but still connects you to the earth. So you can either discharge or charge. Even James Oshman, even Gaetan Chevalier, even these guys, the world experts in grounding, they don't know if your body's charging or discharging. They have no idea. I've asked Dr. Cruz. He thinks we're discharging at night, we're charging during the day when we're connected to the earth. I think that's plausible. So at nighttime, you want to discharge. Well, you need to be connected to the earth. That's what camping is. That's what laying on the earth is. That's what sleeping on the beach. Some people have probably done that and get eaten by the bugs, but at least you're discharging, right? And that we're trying to simulate that in a modern environment because we're trying to shift the degenerative indoors to regenerative. And it's taken us a couple years to put this plug together. Some really clever friends of mine are finalizing the testing of this, and we're starting to see some really incredible results. So this plug will totally change the grounding game and hopefully not create lawsuits for the grounding industry because they have been harming people.
Right.
But hopefully allow them to formally come out and apologize for not doing the right testing and for electrically harming people, and for them to also upgrade their game, design a similar plug, hopefully better than ours. We haven't seen anything close. We're so far ahead. I think in 5 years' time, there'll probably be similar comparative ones because it's taken us many years. But hopefully it lifts their game. Yeah. And hopefully we can all sleep in. We've got partnerships with hotels. Hopefully we can go to hotels and we can have grounding beds in hotels so you can actually regenerate. We work with a lot of athletes at Biospectral. So we want to make sure these guys are, properly watching sunrise, blocking the artificial and grounding at night so they can actually perform at their best and not get these crazy ACL and Achilles and injuries that are non-contact, non-full speed because their water's dehydrated.
That's right.
So we want to make sure that they're nourished. And that's the high performance side. But really, if we can bring this to kids' cots, to hospital beds, to all these things, we're going to make a big impact in nursing homes, all these types of things. I think we can really make a significant effect. And I call to arms anyone else who wants to be part of this and create really productive solutions. Send me an email, approach me. I'm happy to give out free advice on anything. I'm happy to point you in the right direction to the science that's related to your product or whatever it is. And just let's make things better and more passively healing.
I love it. To me, that's like the ideals of capitalism, providing a good and a service that is actually going to add value, and people are going to want to share, okay, I will give you what I've worked hard for, my hard-earned money, because of this product. This is giving me value. This is going to change my life for the better, as opposed to, like you're alluding to, if I'm just going to convey information to you in a way to convince you that this thing is something you want or need, I'm actually giving you what you need. And it also makes me think about the concept of competition. The real root of competition lies in cooperation. And you're looking for everybody to actually improve. You want to work with them, and let's make it better. Let's provide more and more quality for people. And I mean, man, that's a beautiful decentralized approach to really making a difference here. I love that. Now, you talked about something earlier, and I wonder if there is anything through biospectral systems maybe that you're doing, or if we can just get into the science of how this impacts the body and some different things that naturally occur to deplete it, and the sources of what are increasing it, but deuterium and the impact deuterium has on cancers. And you referred before to the vortex that occurs in different ways, that water can be vortexed prior to us consuming it, but also internally the vortexes that are taking place. And if there's something, again, that biospectral systems maybe has something to do currently, or something that can be done.
Yeah, so one thing I can share peripherally on what we're doing, we're looking at building a under sink deuterium depleted water unit. It's something we are trying to prove out right now if it can be done in the size of something like a washing machine. And then we want to try and get it to a bit smaller than that. So we're kind of going through that. I'm not going to say where in the world, but it's somewhere really unique. And I've got 5 partners on that program helping us, a chemist and a biologist and a physicist, to try and figure out how we can do this. Now, this is something that we can't really talk very publicly about, just because I think this has been done multiple times. I think people are doing it all over the world in their own homes. And I think if it gets out or gets commercialized, I think they get in trouble and they get shut down. So anyway, just knowing that that's something that we're working on, it may take a year or two to get it to a point where it's able to be used by people. But yes, definitely stay in touch on that particular development. But I think for people who haven't heard too much, I'm sure you've educated on deuterium, but it's the heavy isotope of hydrogen. It's just got an extra neutron. So it's got this neutron inside it. So it's like yourself, but a fat version, twice as heavy. So it's got the same proton, same electron. And the interesting thing about this deuterium is it was kind of all created when the sun, went through its cycle, and it's really, there's no new deuterium being created. It's kind of just recycling through our ecosystem. And like I was alluding to earlier in the conversation, Australia has a lot of it, but the oceans are usually about 155 parts per million. Your blood is about 150. And inside cancer cells, it tends to be higher, around 160, 170. And usually that deuterium starts accumulating in the factory floor inside the cells when there's permeability through those aquaporin gates in the cell membrane and in the mitochondria that allow that deuterium to leak out of where it should be in the blood and leak into where it shouldn't be inside the cell. And that can slow kinetics, because we are proton pumping, proton current machines. We are moving protons. That's anything with mass. So if you want to move your arm, you got to move protons. If you're moving protons that are twice as heavy, then moving an arm that's twice as heavy takes a bit more energy. So we want to try and make sure that our, inside our cells, we're as efficient at moving things around as possible. So this is where Laszlo Boros and Robert Slovak and Stephanie Seneff and a lot of other researchers, Gabor Sommelier, a lot of these guys have talked about deuterium as a mechanism linked to certain diseases, metabolic diseases like cancer, diabetes, things like that, where the deuterium gets into the mitochondria and clogs the gears up. It clogs that up. We've now got a biological marker, TMAO, which is trimethylamine N-oxide, which is a marker that has now been shown in a 2026 study to be a really good indicator of how much deuterium you actually have inside your body, especially in the kidneys that filter the blood, inside the liver, where you can have fatty liver or visceral fat, which is really just excess deuterium. And you can spot that on an MRI. So when you see all these types of things, you can start to see, okay, there's isotopic fractionation problems. That means there's kinetic energy problems. That means there's disease that soon follows, because when energy drops, acidity starts to go up, biological circadian signaling doesn't have as high fidelity. Biologically, there will be disease at someone's weakest link. So with the deuterium side of the story, it once again is a mechanism. It's not a root cause. The root cause is your environment, your lifestyle, your emotional state, your psychology, your spiritual, inherited trauma, whatever. Like those things are the thing. You're avoiding nature. You're avoiding full spectrum sunlight. You're allowing 15% of polarized light from your computer to come in, hit your eye. You're allowing the EMF to hit your body and thinking you've got a pendant on that's protecting you. All those things are causing the dysregulation of those systems to start to move you closer towards disease. And the deuterium happens to be a key metric inside the biology of how that actually starts to work. So ideally, what the body tries to do, especially through its gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome is about 99% bacteria and about 1% archaea. And those archaea actually turn out to be incredibly important at allowing the bacteria to deplete deuterium or depleting deuterium themselves, because bacteria hate deuterium. They really do. They really do. This is the problem with anywhere that's rich in bacteria. Deuterium is just suppressing that growth to move to more complex life. Well, your gut, if you want your gut to be really complex and doing all of its beautiful light show, I imagine the gut like the Amazon rainforest, this moist, humid, green, like infrared reflective, beautiful place with all this, nourishing ecosystems that are collaborating and some certain things that are sometimes out of balance and whatever. That's the gut. And the gut, the bacteria, if you dump a whole lot of deuterium into there, this whole ecosystem that's sharing nutrients and helping you break things down, it starts to break down. And then the gut-brain axis, the gut-thyroid axis, the gut-heart axis, all these different things start going on. Now I've got autism. Now I've got, cardiovascular disease. Now I've got hypothyroid. And maybe there's excess deuterium in the gut that the bacteria don't like. The archaea aren't helping deplete. And then suddenly you haven't got this molecular hydrogen being built inside the gut. And people are taking molecular hydrogen tablets and hydrogen-rich water and inhaling hydrogen, and it's the number one antioxidant and blah, blah, blah. It's like your gut does that naturally. Just like mitochondria produce the right peptides when you're healthy, right? The gut produces deuterium-depleted, hydrogenated water naturally. And this process is mediated by a lot of the hydrochloric acid and the bacteria and the light that your gut captures, especially the infrared that gets through the outer surfaces and goes deep inside the gut. And we know from a lot of the studies from the Yanomami tribe in South America, and obviously the Hadza tribe in Africa and Tanzania, that the gut microbiome is really very much controlled by light. And the enterochromaffin cells on that sort of cell wall there in the gut, they contain tryptophan residues, which then turn into serotonin. We produce 95% of our serotonin in our gut. Requires UV light for that transformation. It's clearly light getting in there, and there's clearly UV biophotons getting in there. And then that's then sending melatonin to all different parts of the gut and the body to help it heal and filling it with antioxidant power. And then obviously potentially sending signals to the brain to say when it's time to produce those things in the brain. So the deuterium, the way we deplete it is by having a healthy gut, by having a healthy skin microbiome and a healthy tan. We produce this hydrogen-rich water when our mitochondria work well. So the science is deep. The mechanisms are really interesting. I find them fascinating. But the answers are simple. Get a really nice tan. Watch the morning sunrise. How many times has your belly button seen the sun in the last week? How many times has your belly button seen the sun in the last year? How many good fatty acids and full spectrum minerals and vitamins are you eating in your diet daily? When's the last time you've had a dozen oysters? Most people will say, I probably have never eaten a dozen. That's too many. I used to eat 86. I used to eat 5-6 dozen a week when I was recovering from my cancer. And I attribute a big part of my healing to that. Loading up my cell membranes with all the docosahexaenoic acid, all that DHA, to allow my body to conduct the natural electric and magnetic fields from the earth, from the sun, from my natural environment. So the solutions, are simple on that side. But before you add energy to the system, before you get a kick-ass tan, and then get that hydrated by your mitochondrial water to allow the melanin to actually turn and transduce that external environmental energy, be that phonons of sound in the ear or photons on the skin or the eyes. Before you actually get all of that working, you need to stop the poisoning. We are all being poisoned. Air, water, food, electromagnetic, emotion, indoor living, all these things. You cannot feel sick and go, I'm going to go on TikTok and Instagram. Oh, there's a PEMF mat. I'm going to go and buy that and think you're going to get better. You need to stop the poisoning before you add energy to the system. So deplete deuterium, right? Fix the signaling, then add energy to the system, and you will deplete the rest of it. So stop that deuterium load coming in by eating out of season carbohydrates, by looking at artificial blue light and letting that deuterium leak into the mitochondria, by exposing yourself to the wireless radiation, by eating things that contain glyphosate, or walking barefoot on golf courses, or whatever weed killer they might use. Stop drinking tap water with fluoride. All those different things. Stop eating processed bag and box food. Stop eating after sunset, because food is light in storage. So why are you eating light when there's no light up? Doesn't make any sense. You're causing more deuterium. Your body's resilient in the morning. If you're going to pollute it with anything, with a pizza, with, carbs, with sugars, with artificial light, with all those things, the morning you are more resilient. I'm not going to say don't do it, because some people just, they want to eat a pizza. Some people want to watch TV without their blue blockers on occasionally. They're a creative designer and they need to see the colors. Do it in the morning. You're more resilient. You do it at night, you trash your sleep, you trash your resting heart rate, you trash your heart rate variability. Your brain is not sleeping. You're not regenerating. You're getting up to pee twice at night. Your brain ain't sleeping. Your heart, if that resting heart rate doesn't go below 45, I would say, sorry, your heart's not sleeping either. So then you lose your brain, your heart, then you don't have longevity. Now your weakest link, you better know what it is, or it's going to take you by surprise. Yeah. So the system, that's how the system sort of is built, and it works. And the mechanisms will change. As we discover different things, the mechanisms will change. But right now, we know GDF15, growth differentiation factor 15, which was identified by Martin Picard's lab, is an incredible marker for mitochondrial stress. Better than any screen, mito test, whatever. This one is, there's a receptor in the brain for GDF15. And when your mitochondria are sick and stressed, they're going to send GDF15 to your brain. You measure the plasma. You got a decent indication of how much stress your mitochondria are under. Amine N oxide, you measure that in the blood. You've got a decent indicator of how much deuterium is clogging up your system. You measure your vitamin D, how much light you're capturing inside your body. You measure HSCRP for how much inflammatory load is in your entire system. You measure homocysteine to see how your methylation is going, because if there's too much deuterium in that methylation system, your homocysteine is going to rise. So make sure that homocysteine is at a good level, and your DHEA sulfate is a really good one to measure to determine all your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, androgens. All of these don't need to go into that depth. Look at your DHEA. Doctors say it goes down with age. Every year since I started learning this, mine's kept going up. So wow. I don't believe it. You don't need to supplement it. You don't need to supplement progesterone or testosterone unless you're in a serious medical condition. Just get your DHEA up. It's a UV fluorophore bioprotein, and the more nature you can connect with, the better you'll set that system up. And the more UV light you're able to capture in your system without burning, the more deuterium you'll deplete. And the last thing I'll give you is cold and heat is a really good way to deplete deuterium. Heat through sweating, really awesome way. I would do that after exercise. You don't want to do any type of heat, excessive heat therapy before exercise, always after. Cold thermogenesis, cold face dunking, my favorite, full body cold. If you go to the cold tub, if you have a cold tub, if you want to just take a cold bath, up to your bottom lip. I'm so sick of going to these health clubs and seeing people sitting on the side of this cold tub, just above where their nipple is, and they got all this out. They got their carotid arteries, their radial arteries. They've got all this area, the neck, the brown fat on the upper back, the supraclavicular space with all the brown fat here, all this mitochondria and all this brown fat that could be underwater helping you maintain your body temperature. Get down there, right up to the bottom lip, get all your arterial tree under, keep your wrists under the water. If your fingers hurt too much, keep your fingers out, put gloves on if you have to, put a beanie on if you have to, and get up to the bottom lip. And that is how you deplete deuterium from your system as well, because you're increasing energy kinetics in your body. Anything that's cold, you put your phone in the freezer or the fridge, it's going to work better than if you put it on top of the bonnet of your car, the hood, out in the sun. It's going to go to a temperature warning. Same as us. That's a silicon semiconductor. We're a carbon semiconductor. The carbon semiconductors that are hydrated work better in the cold as well. So cold will help you deplete it. Heat will help you deplete it. Sunlight will help you deplete it. Grounding will help you deplete it. Getting a good night rest, having a wind down routine will help you deplete it. That's the constructive side. Stop poisoning artificial visible and invisible light. Mitigate that at the source. Then, if you can't mitigate that at the source by changing the bulbs, by wiring the house, turning the Wi-Fi off, putting your phone in a Faraday bag, then you get the blue blockers. then you get the pendants, then you get the EMF shielded clothing, then you get the other things that try and block it from hitting your body, right? So stop the poisoning, add the energy, deplete deuterium, allow your gut to produce molecular hydrogen, allow melanin to produce molecular hydrogen and oxygen when you get exposed to natural light. Spend time in green spaces. That infrared will go through into the gut to help deplete deuterium. I mean, the formula is simple. The science is complex. The mechanisms will change, but the formula is simple.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love it. So many actionable items, so much value there. One last question related to that, and this is rooted in a conversation I heard Jack have with a friend of mine, Emanuela, on her podcast. They were talking about women in their cycles and heavy bleeding being a sign of depleting deuterium as well. And I have said, what prompted my diagnosis was blood in my urine and clots coming out of my urine. And as I sit and reflect with it, I've drawn so many parallels to a woman in her cycle and me going through this bleeding process, the times that it does happen. And I feel like listening to Jack say that, I'm like, shit, that feels like the driver of when the blood does happen. Because I'll sit and I'll try to think about what have I been doing lately. And I haven't pinpointed, oh, I did this wrong. And I'm sure there's plenty of things I can continue to do to improve upon. But does that make a lot of sense that blood coming out in my urine would be my body trying to get that deuterium out? Amazing.
It does, Jeff. What's more important is the subtle signals before that.
Sure.
And then also identifying, as an example, the subtle signals are circulation challenges, their pupillary response, their dry skin, there's dry palate, there's poor tongue posture and poor facial mechanics, there's lack of mastication, lack of chewing. All those things are, if you're noticing that, mouth breathing, slumped posture, not having regular bowel movements within 30 minutes of eating breakfast, which should happen within 30 minutes of sunrise, which should happen, you should get up 30 minutes before sunrise. That's ideal. If those things aren't happening and you're urinating at night where vasopressin is dysfunctional, that means leptin's off. If leptin's off, your whole system is off. So when those things are happening, then you'll start to see the downstream issues. What's really interesting, though, is I think we've got it all backwards. Everyone thinks when you're sneezing, coughing, when your mucus is coming out, when blood's coming out of you, you're sick. Wrong. That's healing. That's when you're healing. What caused that healing? And that's the most important part. When you start menstruating heavily, when you've got blood in your urine, when you're sneezing and coughing, what was the moment before that allowed your body to make that release, to deplete that deuterium, to allow those pathogens and bacteria and fungal and parasitic and whatever else, germ things, to get out of you? What was that trigger? What is that environmental condition that allowed you to sneeze that pollen out? Because you were holding on to it before that. What allowed you to dislodge that kidney stone or that clot in your urine or that heavy menstrual bleeding? What allowed you to do that? Health did. A healthy environment did. A healthy mindset, a healthy, energetic being state, right? Just like Tony Robbins always says, manage your state. The one thing you can always manage is your state, how you respond to things. And that state of where you come up with that idea, where you detox that deuterium, whatever it is, study that state for yourself. Study that more than you study your star sign, your Enneagram, your haplotype. Study that state of how your body can get into that position to get rid of the mass, the excess mass that you don't need, which is why you don't want huge amounts of food or you don't want to drink protein powder or creatine or all these things. They're all mass. You're not getting proper deuterium depleted, structured, hydrated water with really good fatty acids and minerals. You're not getting that. You're not getting photons that are basically massless. They are massless. That gives you energy without any mass. I mean, that's magic. That's like levitation stuff, right? Yeah. That's like, I think the world record is 379 days without eating. I mean, try and do that without light. You'll go crazy. Try and do that without a magnetic field. You'll be impossible. Try and do that without water or oxygen. See you later. So how important is food in the story? If you can do that. So pay attention to that moment is my suggestion.
Yeah. Amazing, man. I'm going to be watching this over and over myself and taking notes and all that. This is incredible. Thank you. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, no, just incredible. I mean, as I told you when we first talked about bringing you on, what I love about having a guest come on here is I know I'm going to learn. I want the audience to learn, and I want to give some degree of a platform to my guests to talk about what they're doing and promote it. So, biospectral systems for sure, and the book Biotrough for sure will get the audience out there. I'll put those links in the show notes, and anything else. I mean, if you lasting thoughts that you have, anything else you want me to put out there for you, and you can always just shoot me a message too before I get this uploaded to put any links in the show notes that you want me to put out there as well.
Yeah, I love it, Jeff. Thank you. And if anyone who's listening to this can just take action today, the simplest thing that I've found with the biggest biological effect is just getting a pair of blue blockers. So just go on Biospectral Systems, grab yourself a pair of orange lenses if you want to shortcut the system. Yellow will help you get used to them better. It's that plus sunrise was my key intervention to begin to reverse my cancer forever and get rid of it out of my germline. It's gone. That's how I truly attribute a lot of it to getting the natural full spectrum visible in the morning and blocking the artificial. So if there's one action item, watch sunrise, get some blue blockers, and just take one step at a time. You can heal anything.
Thank you so much for your time, and I'm so grateful you've healed yourself and sharing the wisdom to get everybody else to do the same. And my recommendation, audience, is don't wait for a diagnosis. Don't wait to get sick. Do it now. Take care of yourself now so that never happens and you just thrive. And watch this back numerous times and take notes and do the subconscious programming things, and just believe that you were gifted with a body that can heal itself, and give it the right environment, give it the right stimulus, surround yourself with loved ones, and just live life. Till
Amen.
Next time. Yeah, man. God bless. Till next time, everyone. Have a blessed day. You know the drill. If you haven't already, subscribe, like, comment, share, all that good stuff, and be well.